Welcome to the HR Empowerment Podcast, where we will uncover strategies and new insights from HR professionals who discuss up-to-date regulations, best practices, and the most pressing topics like diversity and equity, leadership, dealing with difficult situations, and much more that affect your bottom line and business. Thanks for joining us.
Hey everybody, Wendy Sellers here, the HR Lady. Welcome back to HR Empowerment. Today we have a super exciting guest, Charlotte Otter, who is calling in from Germany. Hello, Charlotte.
Hi, Wendy. Thank you so much for inviting me to be on.
Absolutely. Thank you. You are such an amazing person, an author, a speaker, a podcast host, and you specialize in reputation management, change communication, and building high performance communicating teams. And that's so important. I mean, as the HR lady, I know that 9 out of 10 workplace problems, or really world problems, are communication, right?
Absolutely. And I think that it's so lovely to talk to someone in HR, because I think comms and HR are so closely married in the organization. Sometimes we're best friends, sometimes we're not. But it's always healthy to keep the channels of conversation open.
It really is. And it's just so funny because people think that they have effectively communicated, and other people are there with like blank looks on their face saying, oh, we have no idea what's going on here. So before we jump into that, tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and how you got to where you are now.
Oh, yeah. So I'm South African by birth, and I ended up in Germany because my husband and I moved to work for a German tech company called SAP. We came for 2 years, and it's now 30 years later. And we've been very happy in Germany. We've raised 3 bilingual children here, and I had come from a journalism background, struggled to get into corporate communications at SAP at the time because there were no English-speaking roles. So I had some time out, raised our kids, wrote my first book. And during the process of writing my first book, I became very good at blogging. So it was back in the days of WordPress. And I, got my head around Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn. So in 2012, when I was looking to come back into the workplace, I was hired in as an individual contributor, as an executive communicator. Just as we hire Gen Z kids into the workplace now to teach us all how to do TikTok, I was brought in to help executives get on social media. And that was the start of my career at SAP.
That's amazing. You said your first book. How many books do you have?
Yeah, so I've written 2 novels. They are crime fiction set in my home country of South Africa. And then my newest book, We Need New Leaders, is a business book, actually launches today, June 2, as we're speaking. And it is about the intersection of reputation, leadership, and diversity.
That is amazing. So I want to dive into a little bit more about reputation management as a strategic tool for diverse leaders. I'm in the HR world. Many of our listeners are in the HR world or in the management space and haven't wear the HR hat because they may not have HR or not enough. And so there's so many people in those roles that are tasked with leadership development. What practical steps can they take to help emerging leaders build and protect their reputations?
Yeah, it's such an important topic. And what I'm seeing with emerging leaders is that, and particularly those who are very new in the workplace, is they think it's enough to do a really good job. And what I'm saying, one of the main messages of my book is you need to do a good job and talk about it. And telling your manager once a year at your annual review is not enough. You have to be consistently, as an emerging leader, communicating with your manager and showing how almost every single thing you do fits into the strategy of your team, your department, and your business. So you have to be constantly showing, not just doing. And I think the onus on HR, if they are coaching or managing or have emerging leaders under them, to just remind them that doing a great job is only half the job, that you have to be communicating about your successes, your skills, your dreams, your ambitions, to the point where you're bored yourself, but it's sinking into your manager's head.
It's so important. I was reading a study that said that 99% of private sector managers consider managing corporate reputation is very or fairly important to their own job. So it's not just about your own reputation, it's about your company, your department, your team. And this is so important in my view for HR/managers because you have to kind of be like a mama bear, a papa bear protecting your team while at the same time protecting the company. Otherwise, you may not have a job to go back to, right?
Yeah, I mean, corporate reputation, it's such an interesting one because it's very much entwined with personal reputation, specifically for the CEO or the C-suite or the CHRO. But actually, now that social media is with us, um, everybody is a communicator and
Yeah.
everybody has the tools to communicate. So there's two sides to that. The one side is incredibly positive. You can be, as a manager or an HR leader or an emerging leader, you can be constantly talking about your company's successes or telling your company's stories on social media, but it can also go wrong, as we
Mm.
often see. So it's about having the courage to do it, but having the smarts um, to understand how to get the tone right.
Yeah, absolutely. And, like what have you observed about how reputation in general and the internal company culture or even the department culture for bigger organizations like ones that you work with, how they intersect? What should HR leaders be doing differently to make sure that the reputation and the culture are the same?
Yeah, that's a lovely question. Nobody's asked me that before, so I'm so happy to think about it out loud. But one of the things about reputation is that reputation fails when there's a gap between words and behavior. So this is something that HR folks can be very, very alert for, is when the company or the C-suite or the leadership team is saying one thing, but the culture or the behavior is different, that's when you get a trust gap.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
and that is the danger, that is the danger sign to be looking out for. So the onus is on HR leaders to be highly aware of what the leadership have defined the culture to be, and then be kind of guardians of the culture and to always be reminding themselves and their own teams, but also the managers above them. And you can do it in polite and diplomatic ways, but you can point out very gently that, that kind of behavior that I saw doesn't match company values, doesn't match company culture. And that is potentially reputational, especially now that the boundaries between internal and external have totally gone.
Mhm.
Anything can be leaked. It can be around the world in 10 seconds. So, nothing, almost nothing is confidential anymore. So
Right.
it really goes down to being vigilant about values and behaviors. And then the worst thing, this is when crisis happens, is that gap between values and behaviors when people start to explain it.
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
because that's what spin is, and we
Yeah.
all as human beings, we can smell it. We know when we're being spun to. We're allergic to it. So if there's a mistake or an error or something goes wrong, it's so much better to acknowledge it and be human and go, look guys, it happened, we're really sorry, we wish it wasn't that way, and this is what we're going to do to fix the problem, rather than try and cover it up or hide it or spin it.
Yeah, I love it. I love that you talk about company values. I'm huge on company values. I talk about them in both of my books. And, I even teach people how to create company values. But it is so obvious to employees when the company values are just a marketing ploy, right? And so it's important to be asking, questions, even in interviews or promotions about company values. So it's not just like, oh, this is a great resume. This person will fit in the job well. They know that they have the knowledge, skills, and abilities. Yes, but do they have the behavior? So, folks, please make sure that you are hiring internally and externally, promoting according to your company values. And if you don't really, believe in your company values, change them, get new ones, because I'd rather you be honest about how you want your people to act and behave than just use it as a marketing ploy. I used to see it on people's marketing websites only. And I'm like, no, no, no. I want this on the career section of your website. I want it in the policies. I want it in the procedures. And I actually put in all of my clients, I'm an HR consultant, all of my clients, their job descriptions, I put the company values in the job descriptions, and I have it as a behavioral attribute. Like, these are the values you are going to comply with. So thank you for bringing that up. Let's talk
May
a
I
little. Sure, go ahead.
may I say something more to that?
Sure.
So I love that you say, values used to be on the marketing page, then they moved
Only.
into the careers page. As a communicator, I've seen it on the walls of
Yeah.
organizations, but how do you actually get it embedded into the culture? So on the one hand, HR needs to hire for the right values,
Yep.
but embedding it in the culture is such a hard thing to achieve. And it's something that, in terms of employee engagement, something that communicators talk about quite a lot. And I
Yes.
saw a really good example recently of a French company. And what they do is at the start of every meeting, they say, this meeting will be held in the spirit of X company value, whatever it is. Like maybe this meeting will be held in the spirit of transparency. And by calling it out at the start of every meeting, it's so powerful because then it almost gives me goosebumps thinking about it because you bring it into the room and then it's so obvious if somebody is not behaving according to that value.
Yeah.
So you call it out at every meeting. I thought it was such a brilliant example.
No, I love that. I'm going to start adding that into some of my advice as well, if you don't mind. I'm going to borrow that idea. I'd also like to say, like I mentioned, putting it in the job description, and then when you are giving people feedback on their performance and their behavior, pulling out that job description or a review, even, a formal or informal review. You should be pulling out the job description for every single type of feedback conversation to say, hey, things are going well, or thumbs down, things are not going well. And if your company values are in the job description, then it's going to be super easy to not forget to include. So I would also say, for those of you that are maybe saying, oh, you know what? We don't have company values, or we do, we need to dust them off and clean them up, get people involved, get a committee going. And then, this kind of lines right into connecting the reputation of the company with the market of who you're trying to sell to and service as well. So it's super important to let your employees know that company values are important, and this is where we're going to act and behave. And if you don't, then you can't be here.
Yeah, I love that idea of having a committee to kind of work on the values. And then you have value, and then from there you go to values ambassadors. So people who talk about it in the organization, because I think it's the same thing with so many corporate messages. It has to be reinforced
Yes.
consistently over and over again because we're all human, we're all busy with our jobs, and we do forget.
Yeah, absolutely. This goes right into my next question. You talk about reputation equity as a key to long-term success. So for HR teams or managers or business owners who are wearing the HR hat, if they're focused on succession planning, how can they assess or nurture reputation equity in their talent pipelines?
Yeah, well, if the talent pipeline means folks who aren't yet in the organization, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, so I mean, social media has opened up a wealth of possibility for people who are assessing. I always say to my kids, be careful what you post on social media because somebody might be hiring you in 10 years' time, and, have an awareness that what you post today could be part of your, a job interview and, around the corner. So I think for HR teams who are assessing the reputation of people in their pipeline, watch them on social media, see what language they use, see how they tell stories, see if you believe that their behaviors are matching up to their words. You can get a sense really quickly if somebody's saying one thing, but then suddenly they're in the comment section doing something different. You can get a feeling very, very quickly for that. So I think that social media is kind of a magical tool on one level for people who are looking after pipeline. And then in their own organizations, I think it's about making sure that your talent understand that they too have a responsibility for company reputation. So how they show up on social media, not on their private, but on, say, the company LinkedIn, or if they're talking about the business and what they're up to, that they behave according to the values, behaviors, stories that your company embodies.
Yeah. And, I would even go a step further, and I don't want anybody to interfere with their employees' personal time and their personal social media. But if they are loud and proud, and their social media, their personal social media is open to the public, and they're saying negative things about their clients or the company or their coworkers, or whatever, even politics, whatever it is, that does, depending on your role in the company, especially if you're in leadership, that does, kind of give a slap in the face to the company too. So I'm not a lawyer. I feel like I play one because I'm in HR. I'm the unofficial lawyer, psychologist, event planner, you name it. But, lawyers are probably going to be like, wait a minute here. You might be able to terminate somebody because of their personal social media behavior. So not, we could talk about that for days. So we'll kind of put that to the side. But folks, if you do ever think you're going to attack somebody or, remove them from a position because of what they put on their social media, please get a lawyer involved.
Yes. And may I just say, with my comms hat on, there's a positive flip side to that. So there's this idea of employee advocacy. You know, people trust other people more than they trust brands. So if you can build a powerful group of employee advocates, you can build an amazingly positive picture of your company outside the company boundaries on the different social media platforms. And there are a lot of companies that are dedicated to helping organizations build employee advocacy, but people are always going to believe employees first. They have an amazing amount of credibility.
Yeah, absolutely. Continuing the conversation about, the digital world, and you already kind of mentioned storytelling a little bit too. I mean, we're not escaping the digital world. If you hate social media or not, like, we have to get on there, even if it's just LinkedIn. That's the first thing I do in the morning is I get on LinkedIn. Why? Because my clients and my customers are there. The digital world, as we just mentioned, is louder and more critical than ever for all sides, for management, for the company, for personal. What advice would you give to HR leaders who are coaching executives or coaching even diverse talent on navigating their visibility and storytelling in the digital world, specifically related to reputation management again? Any
Yeah, there's a brilliant concept on reputation which comes from Rupert Younger, who's the head of the Oxford University Centre for Reputation. And he, in his book, The Reputation Game, said that reputation's made up of three things. It's stories, behaviors, and networks, or narratives, behaviors, and networks. So those are the three things to think about if you're coaching an executive on how they show up. It's what are the stories that you tell? How do you tell them in such a way that it's authentic to you and as a human? So important now. It doesn't feel fake. It doesn't feel like your comms team or your HR team have given you a script. It feels real to you. How do those stories match the company narrative? Because you've got to also you're also a representative of the company. And then we talked a lot about behaviors. You got to make sure that the behaviors and the words match. Otherwise you have the trust gap. And then it's about the network. So it's where you're showing up. I would not advise a 65-year-old executive to try and start doing TikTok videos, but they might be very comfortable on LinkedIn. So find the network or networks where you're comfortable. And networks can also be in person. So it can be your alumni organizations, your industry and trade associations. Some people love public speaking. That's another form of networking. Some people are really good at working a room. Also another form of networking. Other people love writing long form blog posts, another form of networking, getting your stories out there. So I think the onus is on HR to match the network to the individual, find a place that they're comfortable, because if they're uncomfortable, it's always going to read to their audience as a little bit fake. So I always tried as an executive communicator to find places where the executives were most comfortable. And one example I worked with an exec who I noticed was incredibly uncomfortable on large keynote stages, but as a board member, you had to do them. So what I would do is have him do the intro and then have 5 or 6 people come and do the rest of the keynote for him. And then he would afterwards get up and thank them. But then the next stage was I noticed that he was incredibly comfortable in rooms of 20. That was where he was at his best. So I made sure that we did as much of his comms as possible in rooms of 20. So it's about really getting to know your executives, seeing their strengths and weaknesses and trying to play to those strengths.
That's awesome. We mentioned earlier that you have a podcast as well, correct?
Yes.
And what's the name
Yeah.
of that podcast and what's it
My
about?
podcast is called Speech Bubbles, and it's tied to the book We Need New Leaders. But it's I've interviewed some people who I've interviewed in the book, but also others, and I'm fascinated by leaders who aren't of the traditional mold, who've come from diverse backgrounds. And when I say diverse backgrounds, I don't just mean race and gender. So I speak to people who are neurodiverse. I speak to people from LGBTQIA backgrounds. I speak to people who have led in while in menopause. So as a, as broad a definition of diversity as we can imagine. And what I'm looking for is how can we change in our brains that old school traditional idea of what a leader is and start to accept new models and new ways of leading?
Yeah, it's so important. And you mentioned the word diversity, and I say the same thing too. Whenever I'm on stage speaking, I'm like, it's not just diversity in the traditional sense of diversity; it's diversity of thought, and that comes across ages, geographies, degrees or no degrees, you name it. And so, you know. We're in a time where DEI efforts face scrutiny, especially here in the United States, and backlash. And I'm doubling down even harder on it because it's so important to have, again, that diversity of thought, diversity of experience, equity, reputation equity included, and making sure everybody who is at the table feels included and inclusive. Otherwise, why are they there? They can go work for somebody else. How can HR leaders balance authenticity, business goals, and even the storytelling that you mentioned, including reputation management, when shaping their employer brand so that they can be the employer of choice and it'll be more affordable to recruit?
Yeah, I mean, when you can't go systemic anymore, it has to become personal. So when I'm counseling leaders from diverse backgrounds themselves, I'm saying to them, as the systems are threatened, the onus is more on the individual to do what I said at the beginning, not just do an excellent job, but talk about the excellence of your
Yeah.
job. There's a writer called Mary Ann Sighart, and she wrote The Authority Gap, specifically about how women are listened to less in the workplace than men. And she said, you can't argue with a stellar record of success. And the
Yeah.
word for me is record. So it's not just about the doing, it's also about the showing. And social media is a great place to do that. But for HR leaders themselves, you know, when it's no longer possible to do it systemically, I think it's kind of the onus is then on HR to become the role models. They've got to not only represent by building their own reputation and showing others how it can be done, but by building that stellar record of success, you actually build a ladder behind you and you show others how they can go up on the leadership ladder and become a leader like you are.
Yeah, it's so important. I mean, we're in such a time of scrutiny on just on the initials DEI, but reputation for HR, reputation for managers, reputation for the company is so important. I'm looking at some statistics here, and it says corporate reputation drives market value with 11.9 trillion of S&P 500 firms value tied to their reputation. I mean, you think about it, there's all these online systems. We'll just go with like Yelp, for example, that customers can give. And every additional one-star Yelp review or one-star rating increases a business's revenue by up to 9%. So you also think about that if your candidates are looking at your Yelp reviews or whatever system you're using, they should be looking at that too, saying, okay, I have an interview with this company. Let me look at their Yelp reviews or whatever other system you're using because it's so important. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, reputation is an intangible asset. It is very easy and very expensive to lose. And so for me, those poor Yelp reviews that are expensive for companies, as you've said, go back to the mismatch between words and values. They go back to the behavioral gap. When candidates come into a company, they are enthusiastic, they want it to go well, and it's usually bad experiences from bad managers who are exhibiting bad behavior that causes candidates to leave. Now, HR can't be responsible for every single bad manager, but HR can be responsible for emphasizing how important the culture is and giving people those tips on how to live the culture. And also, quite interesting, one of my interviewees is a person of color in the UK. And she said when she experiences microaggressions in her team, she doesn't explode in front of that person and shame them. She takes them aside very quietly and has a very quiet, non-threatening one-on-one conversation asking, why did you say that? What are the beliefs that are behind that? This is how it landed for me as a person of color. So you can change culture one quiet conversation at a time. It doesn't have to be enormous campaigns, big blasts.
Yeah.
You can change culture one to one as human beings.
Yeah, we often forget about that H part of HR, right? The human experience, and that, everybody's going through something. We need to have empathy and a little bit of emotional intelligence and even some common sense as well. That's a whole other conversation. I was reading another stat here that says 69% of job seekers would reject a job offer from a company with a bad reputation online, like on Yelp. Even if they're unemployed, they'll say, nope, I'm not going to work for that company because I've read all the reviews. And folks, if you're in recruiting, the people that are listening, you need to understand, or even if you're not in recruiting and you're forced to be in recruiting, there are so many hidden websites out there that your current employees, your past employees, and your candidates can go to and do ratings on your company. So I encourage everybody to please do a deep dive, and don't think it's only going to take an hour, because it's going to take probably a full week to figure out where are the remarks about my company all the way down to my department on the internet somewhere, and then how can I fix them, instead of just saying let's take them off there. No, let's really look at the mirror and say, am I part of the problem, right? 49% of companies' reputation is attributed to its CEO. And so we see that in the news often too. And even if the CEO happens to be the owner, whether you have a board or not, HR, you need to respectfully and professionally speak up and let them know that, hey, your reputation is good or bad. And because of that, it is affecting our market value. So any thoughts about that, Charlotte?
Yeah. I mean, CEO and company reputation are inextricably linked, and we're seeing examples of that right now, of companies' values tanking because the CEO's reputation is suddenly not very good. I would say to HR folks, you've got a partner in the organization on this reputation topic, and that is the head of comms or the communicators. They care deeply about reputation. Partner with them, build a bridge to comms, become their best friends, and then you go to the CEO as a pair. And it's much more comfortable to talk about something like this when there's two of you in the room.
Yeah, there really is. And just wrapping up the conversation that we were talking about, DEI, a clear communication and measurable outcomes. Make sure that you are transparent to your employees and to your marketing base as well, whether it's for candidates or for actual paying customers. I did some research before we went live here. Transparent updates and involving employees in the DEI efforts can bridge the satisfaction gap between executives up to 82% satisfaction and employees regarding their DEI progress. So as I already mentioned, I'm a big believer in getting employees involved in any kind of effort, reputation management, all the way down to DEI, and really, stop sugarcoating things and get the employees to speak up in a committee or a survey or whatever, and listen to them. Just because you don't like them as a human or what they have to say doesn't mean that it's not actual truth. So before we do wrap up, are there any resources, books, courses, or organizations that you'd recommend for listeners when they're diving deeper into reputation management? Of course, your book. What's the name of your book is again?
My book is called We Need New Leaders, Mastering Reputation Management to Reshape the C-Suite. A couple of books. I love The Authority Gap that I mentioned by Marianne Sieghart. Also, I think The Reputation Game by Rupert Younger from Oxford University is absolutely brilliant. And then a book out of the US by Porter Braswell called Let Them See You, which is specifically for candidates from diverse backgrounds. And he talks a lot about how to show up at work and be seen for the great work that you do. So Porter's book is excellent.
Awesome. Charlotte Otter, thank you so much for coming today. How can people find you and connect with you?
Oh, thank you so much. So I'm on LinkedIn, Charlotte Otter, and people are very welcome to connect with me. Otherwise, my own website is charlotteotter.com, and there are links to my book, my podcast, and my newsletter.
Awesome. Well, I'm so excited to get your book and so excited for you. I hope this podcast session has been beneficial to our listeners and helpful to you as well, Charlotte. Everybody, this is a reminder that if you listen to this podcast via the HR Empowerment website, you can also receive HRCI and SHRM credits. So you simply go to auroratrainingadvantage.com and look for the podcast tab. Take care, everyone, and thanks for joining us. Take care, Charlotte.
Thanks for having me, Wendy.
Thank you.